Allow me to first actually properly introduce this topic first, I guess, before you start finding me, huh? That way, give me a better chance to clearly cover the domains that I want to discuss specifically for today. Obviously, you know that the idea of morality in itself, cognitive relativism, and moral realism in itself, relativism, because I'm going to talk to you about cognitive relativism. I feel it's predominantly known in philosophy, right? I don't want to take that philosophical trend today. I've covered the philosophy a lot in my undergrad and in my honours, but now I thought, let me talk to you about cognitive relativism from the perspective of neuroscience and psychology, because I felt that this is really where we need to be heading towards if we want to find empirical evidence to support either side of the argument. It's not going to be useful going into philosophical tangents, arguing this and that, but not really having any solidified empirical evidence. And that's why I like Peter Singer, for example. Peter Singer not only is a neuroscientist, but he's also an ethicist, very well known. How he's able to intertwine neuroscientific findings with cognitive relativism, moral realism, how he's able to mix all of these ideas together with empirical evidence, that's what I really admire, and that's what I'm really hoping to do today, but I am trying to be short because we are on 15 minutes. Okay, so my name is Abbas. I might also go by the name Jason, so my name is Jason Abbas. And I am currently doing my internship at the Autism Center for Translational Medical Research. So that's at the Brain and Mind Center. I'm also currently doing my research on autism in itself. So you find a lot of social cognitive behavioral dysfunctions in children, and that's what I'm mainly interested in. So I'm going to argue tonight relatively on cognitive relativism and why I believe that this is perhaps a very strong argument. But I want to differentiate firstly, well actually before I differentiate between moral relativism and cognitive relativism, which is very basic, I first want to draw your attention to this image here. This is an image obviously of the sun, and it's a nice evening, probably 5 p.m. in the evening. So if once you're taking that romantic stroll with your beloved along the beach sands, looking at the sunset along its horizon, then comes Hume. Then comes Hume after all of that, that emotional setting that I framed for you. And that's part of what I want to try to produce to you all and show to you, that morality is emotions. It's nothing but emotions. And because it is emotions, it is relative. Okay, so Hume comes along, and Hume says, well, the sun does rise. It rose yesterday, right? It rises today. So, will it rise tomorrow? Right? Some of you who are philosophers are familiar with this. It's a very, very popular inductive skeptical argument. Will it rise tomorrow? That's the very important question, I think, which was not addressed properly until Karl Popper comes along and justifies a scientific, rationalized argument for this problem. But in essence, that's exactly the same problem I want to present to you all today. The sun is setting, the sun rises. How can we be sure that it's going to set tomorrow or it's going to rise tomorrow? There is no link. There is no strong argumentative link to demonstrate a connection between what happens today and what happens tomorrow. What happens yesterday and what happens today. So, realism and relativism. So, realists hold that our judgments are true when they accurately describe or correspond to a reality that exists independently of our perceptions, conceptions, theories, or desires. By the way, I'm going to have to ask you to forgive me. I do have a cold, so if I'm not clear, please do ask me to repeat. On this view, a true statement such as water contains oxygen describes a fact about this independent reality. It rests on a scientific model that may be said to carve nature at its joints. But an obvious question arises. How can we determine that our judgments are true in this sense? The obvious answer is that we test them by making experiments and observations. I say it will snow today, and I test this by watching the sky. I say water contains oxygen, and I confirm this by showing that one of the elements separated out by electrolysis supports combustion. When our assertions are decisively confuted by experience, we conclude that they are false. Relativists accept that this is how we normally conceive of truth and falsity. In ordinary usage, the word true means something like corresponds to the facts. And as an account of our everyday epistemic procedures, it is unobjectionable. But they argue that it loses coherence if it is elevated to the metaphysical level. For what is really happening, even when we are confirming the most mundane belief about the empirical world, is that we are satisfying ourselves that this belief coheres with other beliefs. We can confirm that the sea is salty by tasting or by conducting a chemical analysis of seawater, but these procedures only confirm our belief about seawater in the sense of showing it to be compatible with or even entailed by a host of other beliefs. For instance, the sample we are examining is typical, that nothing else tastes quite like salt, that our sensory faculties are trustworthy on this occasion, that salt tastes roughly the same at different times. What we can never do, argues relativists and other non-realists, is check the degree of correspondence between our judgments and reality as it is independent of our experience of it. To do this, we would have to take a sideways-on view, or a God's-eye worldview, of the cognitive relation between subject and object. But this is impossible, since any vantage point we adopt will necessarily be that of the subject. For the same reason, we cannot compare our overall conceptual scheme or theoretical model of reality with reality as it is in itself. So hopefully that set for you the benchmark. How many minutes am I on, by the way? Okay. For the idea of what relativism is and what I'm arguing for relativism. Cognitive relativism, in contrast to moral relativism, is the argument that not only truths, not only moral facts, but also truths in themselves are relative. So it's a very extreme argument, and I'm really waiting. I see Hasan seems to be writing a lot. He's charging it up against me now, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about this. So obviously, there are two premises. There are two claims in cognitive relativism. The first is the truth value of any statement is always relative to some particular standpoint. And secondly, no standpoint is metaphysically privileged over others. Moral realists don't have a problem with the first argument. That's totally acceptable for a lot of them. What they can't accept is the second premise, that no standpoint is metaphysically privileged over all others. So I can't accept the fact that my perceptions of the world, my moral facts of what I believe is right and wrong, are superior to yours. That's wrong. That's something that realists don't like. Because realists, in essence, want to argue that, no, there is a standpoint, there is a norm in which all truths come to. So I know for a lot of people, because the average idea is that we do have normal standard norms. So a lot of people, obviously, I'm expecting in this crowd to be against this proposition. And hopefully in the question and answer session, we'll be able to talk about this in further detail. Okay, so what do people think of this? Cannibalism. Moral appraisal of the case is based on a gut feeling. I want to argue here that, as I said to you before, emotions create morality. Morality has a rational aspect to it. It's cognitive morality or cognitive empathy. but the outstanding aspect of empathy comes from emotions. And that's a critical argument forwarded by Jesse Prince, who was a neuroscientist and philosopher, and I also sympathize with this idea. So, what do people think of cannibalism? Does anyone think that it's okay, there's nothing wrong with it? I'm a moral realist, I'm a relativist. Probably you're thinking, oh, I'm a relativist, so I should say, no, it's okay, I don't mind eating another person's hand, I don't mind eating someone's heart, or someone's liver. What do people think?
Well, I was going to say you need to define the situation first. Like,
okay.
Situation...
Okay, so there's a context. So you are a relativist, are you?
No.
You're not a relativist?
No, there's a context that still means that the realist case is okay.
Right.
Which is that if the person's already dead, is it a problem?
Mm.
Maybe
True.
not.
True.
Okay, now that sounds pretty disgusting as it is.
True.
But what I mean is...
But you can't be a realist if you're arguing that. Because
No,
you're arguing that it's wrong under all circumstances.
No, because the reason that cannibalism would be wrong, maybe from a realist standpoint, is that you assume that you have to kill a living person first.
Sure.
But if the person's already killed and you haven't had a hand in there, maybe you're out in the wild and the only food that you can find is a dead person who happens to have died recently who's there.
Sure.
Then maybe eating it is actually okay.
Sure. Okay.
And I think that's probably the case, and I can still hold with my realist views.
Okay, wonderful. We'll discuss that after, how you can do that, because I don't see how you can do that. Any other views?
Yeah.
Yes.
I sort of... I'll get into this in my presentation, but I sort of think you're painting a portrait of realism as a sort of absolutist position that, irrespective of any of the circumstances, this is always wrong and this is always right. But I don't agree that as a realist I have to be committed to that. I can be a relational realist where I do take into account certain factors, but there are still some fundamental moral facts, like torturing babies for fun, like is always wrong. So I don't really agree with the way you're sort of painting realism as an absolutist position.
Okay, but I disagree. I don't think that's realism at all. I think relational realism is a lot of bull. That is, I believe that's a field of relativism in itself.
But that's just your emotional response.
No, I'll prove it to you why. I'll prove to you why.
I just want to say quickly that I think we might actually be talking past each other still a little bit, but we can get back to that.
Sure.
Get to the discussion.
Okay,
So
sure.
you can have-
Okay. Oh wow, I've still got a lot more to talk about. Anyway, okay.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I want to draw your attention quickly. I'm going to stop asking questions. To this example here, I do tend to bluff on a lot. So imagine a man named Heinz who cannot afford to pay for a drug needed to save his wife from cancer. After unsuccessfully pursuing legal means to get the drug, should Heinz break into a lab and steal it or not? Why do I ask this question is because this was exactly the same question that Kohlberg had asked his subjects in order to devise his stages in moral development. And this is why I say I want to mainly focus today on the psychological aspect of moral relativism rather than the philosophy of it. So Kohlberg identifies 6 stages, grouped into 3 levels. In the first stage, children focus on obedience and punishment, as you can see. They justify moral judgments by appealing to the punitive responses of authorities. After that, children begin to think instrumentally about morality. They think about the benefits of the moral agent. Kohlberg calls these 2 stages pre-conventional morality. They are characterized by an egotistical orientation. This is followed by a 2-stage conventional level of moral thinking, in which children begin to think about conformity to a group. In the first stage of conventional morality, stage 3 of the overall sequence, children adopt a good boy or good girl orientation. They begin to focus on how they will be regarded by others. In stage 4, there is a focus on law and order. At this stage, there is a focus on duty to fixed rules and the maintenance of social order. Kohlberg thinks that conventional morality can be followed by post-conventional morality, but he recognized empirically that this final level of development is rarely attained even among adults. Post-conventional morality begins with a 5th stage of moral development in which people focus on social contracts. At this stage, people continue to think in terms of law and order, but now they justify laws by appeal to broadly utilitarian principles. There is a potential 6th stage, after that which Kohlberg characterizes in terms of universal moral principles. These rules are abstract and categorical, like the Golden Rule, rather than concrete, like the Ten Commandments or biblical passages. In other words, Kohlberg thinks that the moral development should, but rarely does, bring us ultimately to a Kantian conception of morality. I don't want to go into anything more because I'm way over time, but I really haven't formulated my argument. But what I will do now is I will sort of present to you, and we'll go into the rebuttal stage and the discussion stage, into elaborating on this argument. But in brief, what I do want to say is that the unconscious... so as you can see from the Kohlberg, Stage of Moral Development, that we have various levels in which humans develop their sense of morality. And as far as we are concerned, and as far as Kohlberg is arguing, morality is a relativized junction in which different cases impact the way in which we can perceive what is right and what is wrong. So we have the stages of punishment and obedience at infancy. And then this generates onto a self-interest. And then this generates onto an authority until we reach universal principles. It's funny because today I was arguing with one of my classmates about moral realism and relativism. He was supporting moral realism, as they all do, as the ordinary people tend to do. I'm sorry, I'm not insulting you all. I'm joking. But it was telling me, no, there are moral facts about the way the world operates. And that there are ways that that we define good. It doesn't change. And what I thought about that was, okay, perhaps you may argue that there are moral facts, but you can't deny the fact that truth does change over time. For there to have been a truth at a particular instance of time, because we're talking specifically about autism, okay? So autistic children, are they disabled? Do we say that they're cognitively impaired? I argue no. I believe in neurodiversity. I believe that social impairment does not indicate that there is a neurological disorder in them. I think it's unfair to suggest that. So what I would argue is that there is neurodiversity. We all have our circuits wired in various ways. And these circuits fundamentally impact the way in which we perceive experiences in the world around us. And as we're developing according to a particular culture, within a particular context of a society, we therefore develop certain ideas of what is right and what is wrong. We weren't born with ideas that this is right and this is wrong. Obviously, within the field of religion, we're supposed or allegedly led to believe that there are fundamental truths and fundamental wrongs. I am happy to argue from a religious perspective that that is also a very concocted view. I believe religion strongly recommends, especially within the Oriental traditions, that morality is something which a human being develops, and it changes over time. Laws are not meant to be the same as they were from 1,400 years ago. So that's why within the religious context we've had prophets that have come down over time to change rules, to change laws. Not because truths are once and the same at all times. No, they're constantly changing as human beings progress and develop. So that's from a religious perspective. So I wanted to also target it from that perspective as well. I'm not going to go any further because I've gone way over time. Okay, it's 15, that's it. Okay, so I don't have a problem with moral realism in itself, okay? I am against the idea. Okay, I haven't structured this. I've been very, very busy. I'm very sorry for that. I do believe it's a tool for civilization engineering, but I don't believe it is the way. We're led to believe that there are certain truths in the world, and that's totally fine. It helps us develop. It's good for our development. But that should not be led to insinuate the idea that there are moral facts. I think that's a very strong argument in which moral realists try to argue, which is that no, it actually helps us develop further. But I don't see that as a proof that there are, in fact, moral facts. So moral...
7 minutes later, that's it.
Okay, alright, I give up. Thank you very much. I'm happy to discuss the rest of it after.
Hasan, please do not ask questions.
No worries, okay.
Don't do the same thing right now.
Alright. Well, that was a lot to unpack. Right, first of all, thanks once again to everybody for coming today. Tonight I'm going to be defending moral realism. So, just before I start, I wanted to respond to a few things that my opponent said, if he doesn't mind. A few things which we can discuss more in the discussion section really stood out to me. Things like relative truth, as a concept, I don't really find that logically coherent. When you say that there is no absolute truth, is that statement absolutely true? If not, it's self-refuting. It's a bit like saying,
Hillary Clinton's on. Come on, seriously.
No discussion.
it's a bit like saying that there are no sentences longer than 3 words. So I found that self-refuting. Again, as I mentioned in my comments, I disagreed as well with your portrayal of realism. I'm going to be presenting a view of moral realism which takes into account all the problems that you was talking about, that is fully compatible with moral development and which is fully compatible with moral progress as well. There's no reason why we can't believe in moral facts and believe in moral progress as well. So, and other points I'll respond to as well in the rebuttal section. But tonight, just be defending 2 contentions. I think there are no real good reasons for supposing that moral relativism or error theory, which is the view that there are no moral facts, is true. And I think there are good reasons for thinking that some form of moral realism is true. We might not pinpoint the exact type, but some form may be true. So I'm going to look at what metaethics is, and we'll be looking at some arguments people might give for thinking that there are no moral facts. I'm going to be looking at one version of moral realism I find very compelling, and different ways that moral values can be objective. Because when we talk about objective moral values, people think of these overarching eternal principles that are somehow built into the structure of reality. And those things seem like illogical, incoherent things. So therefore, they don't exist and there are no moral facts. Well, no. That argument actually misconstrues the notion of objectivity. Philosophers have actually distinguished many types of objectivity, and these types of objectivity are fully compatible with our current scientific picture of the world. So, how will I show there are objective moral values? Well, it's really a 3-step approach. I'm going to show that non-moral values in general have the capability of being objective. I'm going to show moral values in particular can be objective. Then I'm going to show the value of life has a particular quality. And then that leads us to moral realism. So metaethics is the philosophical field which looks at the nature of moral statements. What do we mean by good and bad? What do we mean by right and wrong? What's the ontological foundation of these statements? Is there any basis for them? There's common reasons people might think that there are no absolute or there are no moral facts that are objective. Firstly, the argument of disagreement. People disagree about right and wrong cross-culturally. But the fact that there's disagreement doesn't at all mean that there's no fact of the matter. There are scientific disagreements, there are philosophical disagreements, there are mathematical disagreements. And that doesn't mean there's no fact of the matter. Also, the degree of disagreement is exaggerated often as well. Argument from tolerance. Why should I assume that my moral values are superior to other people? Well, that argument actually assumes objective morality. It assumes that it's objectively right to tolerate other people. But where does that moral obligation come from? And argument from queerness, which we can discuss later on. So yes, error theory, morality is fundamentally a product of evolution. Evolution doesn't track the truth. There's no moral facts. This argument is also very suspect, because if you imagine a society, for example, of bees who lived in a society and, for example, say practiced infanticide, and their emotional states compel them to think, this is the right thing to do for whatever reason. Let's assume, however, that these bees develop cognitive rationality, the ability to think and reflect on their actions. This very thought experiment demonstrates that morality isn't totally just emotional, wishy-washy talk. We have the ability to form moral evaluations independent of our emotional states and look at things from an idealized point of view. So, I think that there are objective moral values. I think that some things like torturing babies for fun is really wrong, independent of what society or culture you're in. It makes no difference if we lived in 1066 or 2016. Torturing babies for fun was really wrong. So, what do I mean by objectively wrong? There's 2 types of objectivity. Abbas was focusing most of his presentation on ontological objectivity. He said, look, there are no mind-independent values. I can't believe in any mind-independent facts, because most of our values are mind-dependent. I agree with him on that. However, that doesn't follow from that there can't be any mind-dependent facts, and it doesn't follow that those mind-dependent facts can't be objective. And I'll show you how they can be. An example of a mind-independent fact would be that the University of Sydney exists. That's independent of my mind. But that's ontological objectivity. Philosophers have also looked at epistemological objectivity. There can be objective facts that are mind-dependent, that are dependent on subjective states. Take, for example, the statement that the radius of the Earth is 6,400 kilometers. This is an objective fact. Yes, it relates to a particular standard, but that very statement is objective. In the context of morality, we can actually discern what's objectively right and wrong through what's called an ideal observer. And I'll get into what that means. So, why do I say this? Again, because I think Abbas starts with the false assumption that there are morality has to be mind-independent, and I agree with him that there can't be any mind-independent values, because values are a type of thought. So you can't have thoughts independent of mind. So I think there are mind-dependent facts which can exist, and yeah, so that's the position of dependent. To demonstrate this, I'm going to give you a thought experiment. Imagine someone called Mary, and she wants to eat a chili pepper. Before eating the chili pepper, she thinks it's a really good thing to do. She likes the colour red, she thinks it's aesthetically pleasing, but after eating it, she realises it's really hot, and her evaluation changes. So the question we should ask ourselves is, why did her evaluation change? Well, simply those general facts, that her physiology, that her psychology, which basically determine what she valued. And I found one thing interesting that Abbas's talk, where he spoke about neurological diversity. Would we think, for example, disease is just physiological diversity, or is there something actually going wrong here? So I thought that was interesting. This is a side note. But my point basically here is there are facts which seem to determine what we are going to value. Now, how can we show this leads to an objective morality? Well, simple. This is my favourite approach. This is Peter Railton. Peter Railton defends what's called ethical naturalism. This is the view that we can reduce moral statements to natural facts of the natural world. And if moral facts are really just a way of talking about natural facts, then they are objective and they exist. So Railton begins this in a three-step process, similar to one I'm outlining. He basically says, look, like Mary, we all have similar desires that we want. And these desires are, of course, subjective. I'm not saying that because we have desires, it shows that's what satisfies them is objectively right. I'm saying we all have desires, and these desires are non-morally good for us. It's good for us to eat food, engage in activities which are pleasurable. So he basically says the individual's non-moral good is what they would want themselves to pursue. However, he notes that our non-moral goods are often the thought of bias and subjectivity. How can we get objectivity from this? Well, simple. He basically says, imagine an idealized version of yourself. Imagine a person who has unqualified cognitive and imaginative powers and full factual and nomological information about his physical and psychological constitution. On this view, A will have become A+, who has complete and vivid knowledge of himself and his environment. So in this sense, we can derive moral values. What's non-morally good for a person is what an idealized version of that person would desire for themselves. Now that's what's non-morally good. How do we get to objective moral good? Well, it's simple. Morality is inherently social. Morality only makes sense when there's many people involved. So we can extend this idea of objective moral values, epistemologically objective values, from the point of view of an ideal observer to society. Imagine a group of people called S, and imagine they will become an ideal group, S+. Now we ask S+ what they want S to seek, and S+'s answer would be what is objectively good for S. So since morality is a social thing, the objective interests of S are going to be objective moral values. So morality takes into account the interests of others, and we can have epistemologically objective moral values, which are obviously independent of our subjective opinion. We can have the idea of an idealized observer who makes these opinions. So ultimately, we reduce moral to non-moral, and moral facts are just natural facts. Larry Arnhart has produced a study where he identifies 20 universal desires shared by all humans. Yes, there are certain cross-cultural differences, disagreement, but the amount of agreement in regards to certain desires, what's non-morally good for us, is actually quite overwhelming and quite documented. Things like health, parental care, sexual identity, friendship, all these things are intersubjectively universal across all humans. And it can actually form a basis for an epistemologically objective morality. So how can we show that there are, what types of values can we derive from this picture? Well, I think the value of life we can show to be objectively valuable. If you look at facts about human biology, psychology, history, humans tend to value life, humans tend to, but it doesn't show that they're necessarily good, morally good. What I'm saying is an ideal observer would recognize that life is a necessary condition for all ends except death. Hence, it's the ultimate precondition for intrinsic values. So given an idealized version of ourselves is not subject to biases and emotional predispositions, they would evaluate as an ideal observer that this is something that we should value. And that evaluation is not subjective, it's epistemologically objective. Now there are three potential objections to this view, and I'll go through one of them for interest of time. One objection is the is-ought gap, which was David Hume, who's over there at the top. His basic idea was, look, how do you get from is statements to ought statements? How do I get from what is the case to what ought to be the case? I can describe all these facts. And I'll just finish up on that argument if that's okay. 5 minutes? Okay. Sure, okay. So I'll just continue that. So he basically says, look, we can describe all these facts about human biology, psychology, but how do you get from that to we ought to do something? Now, my first response to him is this. I have given you Railton's account, and Railton's account is successful in reducing the moral facts to the non-moral facts. Hence, we've jumped the first gap, which is actually showing that these facts are actually exist, and they actually play an explanatory role within our scientific framework. So we've jumped the gap by showing that they're reducible to natural facts. Also, I don't think that the is-or problem is strictly a problem for morality. It's a problem for every single domain of discourse. Take this statement. Proteins are organic molecules, carbohydrates are organic molecules, nucleic acids are organic molecules, lipids are organic molecules, therefore living creatures are organic molecules. It may look like this is a valid argument, but it's not a valid argument. How do you get from all these premises to the last premise? How do you get from an is statement to an ought statement? It's very much like saying, how do I get from talking about one sphere of discourse, from talking about chemistry, to talking about biology? And it's simple. We just provide an account. We just add an extra premise. Add this extra premise. Living creatures are made up of proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. Therefore, they're made of organic molecules. So we've bridged the gap by providing an account. So I don't think this objection is particularly successful. So yeah, I think this is successful. It explains the nature of moral judgments. It doesn't reduce to mere emotion. It provides an idealized version of ourselves. It doesn't appeal to any ontological, platonic entities. You don't need to accept us to be a moral realist. You just investigate moral truths like other truths about the natural world, and we can discover those truths. Some people can be wrong about them, and some people can be right about them. And the fact that people disagree doesn't show that there's no fact of the matter. It just shows that there's a lot of disagreement. So, on this picture, have we put in morality into the universe, or are there actually good reasons for being moral under this picture? Well, an amoralist could say, well, I don't care about morality. Why at all should I be moral? Well, I think perfectly correct response is because if you did, more human desires will be fulfilled, and there'll be more human flourishing. Now, a person could ask, why? Well, again, say the same thing. Because if you did, more human desires will be fulfilled, and there'll be more moral flourishing. I mean, some people are simply, like psychopaths, simply incapable of recognizing these sort of moral facts. It doesn't render the fact that these moral facts don't exist, as illusory. Yeah, and I'll get in. Who decides what's moral? I mean, this again applies to anything. Who decides what's scientific? Who decides what's logical? Again, we just provide an account. Reasons are important, not who gives them. Before I get to my conclusions and finish off my talk, I think it's important to note that, of course, our view of things of the world changes, but that doesn't show that the underlying principle must have been flawed. For example, you can example from physics. Relative motion, people used to believe in absolute motion. There was an absolute reference frame to relate all motion to. And now we know that's false, that all motion in a sense is relative. But does that mean that we should become error theorists about motion and deny the reality of motion? No, it simply means that, yes, there is a fact of the matter about things moving, but we simply integrate that into our modern scientific understanding. We don't negate that. The fact that people used to think water was an element, that's false. Water is composed of elements, it's not an element. That doesn't show there's no fact of the matter about who's right, who's wrong about water. It just shows that we have to re-evaluate that in light of our scientific understanding. And I showed that by reducing moral facts to natural facts, we don't get rid of moral facts, we just explain where they come from. So in conclusion, I don't think we need not fall into the error of the error theorists. Moral facts are reducible to facts about the natural world. Moral realism provides a perfectly consistent account of morality, and they're epistemologically objective moral values which can form a solid basis for right and wrong. Thank you very much.
We're going to have now 7 minutes.
I think because I want to avoid the philosophical discussions because I don't like all this Hilary Putnam and epistemological and ontological arguments. I mean, I do adhere to all these ontological and epistemological falsehoods of moral realism. But I want to clearly state here that I don't think there is a problem with having moral facts. But what I do believe is that moral facts are not universal.
So
Okay.
in what sense are they
There's
facts?
no problems. I can have a fact about the universe. I can have certain values. But that's relative to me.
Right.
I don't think that you should conclude, therefore, because I believe there are certain facts, there are facts.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you mind going into that?
Responding?
Yes, please.
Sure.
please.
You've got 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that.
Is that okay?
Let's go
Okay,
into
carry
this,
on.
and afterwards.
It's a program.
No, the point is, firstly, I wasn't assuming that I think there are values, therefore there must be values. I said that, look, if we look at certain facts about human psychology, biology, and I didn't ignore those things. I incorporated it into my philosophical argument. If we take into account those particular factors, we recognize that there are certain facts which seem to determine our values. Now, I'm not saying that these things are good relative to my perspective or your perspective. I'm saying, imagine an idealized version of yourself who is impartial, has access to all the relevant facts. We have the right to ask the question, what sort of evaluation would that person make? And based on the account that Railton gave, that response that that observer gives will be epistemologically objective. And that's a form of moral realism. So I think there's no problem with asserting that.
Okay, can you outline for me, rather than reference to Railton and all that, what is your specific argument for moral realism? Because I saw a lot of
My specific argument would be the fact that...
references.
No, the argument I gave was basically that there are certain facts about human experience which are, in a sense, best explained by positing the existence of these facts. So I gave the example of Mary and the fact that she is predisposed to value certain things after certain experiences. So there are certain facts which seem to determine what we value. So I'm saying if you then imagine an idealized observer who has relevant to all these information, then the evaluation they make will be objective. Torturing, from their point of view, they're not constrained by cultural social evolution. It's a fact of the matter that torturing babies for fun is really wrong. Would you disagree with a statement like that? How would you evaluate a statement like that?
Oh, how I would evaluate a statement
Do you
as
think that
such.
statement is false? Or where do you stand on that?
I would say so to torture a baby for fun is totally unacceptable.
You
You guys are worried. I was going to say it's totally acceptable. It's totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
Given that we as humanity, see, this is where I want to make the differentiation here. In cognitive realism, we want to argue that there is no problem with moral facts. To progress society, to make society develop further, there's not an issue with that. So as far as the conventions of the social structure or the norms that we're living in today, I can accept that that is wrong. I'm not a psychopath to say, no, it's fun. Like I can morally justify it. But what I want to say is that that does not lead me to prove that there are moral facts.
Sure.
You haven't addressed
I
that.
wasn't saying that because we all have these intuitions, right? I wasn't arguing. I was just simply trying to see where you stand on what moral facts are.
Sure.
But my basic point is, when you examine certain statements like this, I mean, even from personal experience, we don't seem to think that. I mean, I showed you my account that life can have epistemologically objective moral values, and by torturing a baby, you're ruining that person's well-being and life. And from the account I provided, that's not my opinion. That's fact of the matter. So I mean, you can say, I don't like Putnam, I don't like the philosophical arguments, but I want to understand specifically where's the problem with my account? Because I haven't identified any issue.
I want to know what's the problem with my account.
Because the problem with your account is that you start off with this view that moral values can only be ontologically objective. But I'm saying, look, I agree with you, they can't be mind-independent values, but they can be mind-dependent values, and the fact that they're mind-dependent doesn't mean they're not objective. They can be epistemologically objective. So I want to understand why that view isn't a satisfactory form of moral realism for you.
Only because I don't believe, and that's what I'm saying, I don't believe we can connect, okay,
Right.
the premise, the argument,
Right.
that there are certain truths that we accept in society.
Yeah.
I don't believe that would translate to the argument that there are absolute truths.
But I think,
Maybe.
sure, okay, I agree with you, I'm not absolutist, I wouldn't use the language of absolute moral values, but, I mean, objective in a sense that, if we, as I keep saying, imagine an idealized version of ourselves, then okay, fair enough, there might not be absolute values, But I think there are objective moral facts, and the account I gave is, again, I mean, you spoke about, for instance, like childhood development, but you can say the same thing about childhood development of the understanding of science. For example, we know that children object permanence. There's a certain stage where children are not aware of the existence of other people. Does that show that there's a fact of the matter about the existence of other minds? No, it just shows that we as humans, there can be moral facts, and our ability to discern them obviously can be developmental. There's no reason why that's they're a conflict with each other.
Sorry.
May I jump in to help?
Yeah, please.
Can I
1
sit
hour.
in, like, I'll stand
Yeah, sure. I think it would be better to finish off with 7 minutes.
Or
And
we
then
can
we
just
go
already
ahead.
open it up, please. I'm more than happy to. I can't
So
debate
please have a
it.
seat and then, okay,
Yeah.
we can open this.
Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
no.
there's a way out for you. So what he's saying, I got to try and recollect my thoughts here. So he talked about, he said the reason that there are moral facts, the reason. So okay, we've got to break down some language first. I believe that you've been mixing up some language, which is kind of confusing the matter. So you would say, oh, I believe that this is wrong, and then you would say, I think there are moral facts, I just don't think they're absolute. And then I don't think there's, I believe that there's a truth, but then I don't think there's an absolute truth. I feel like that language of truth and moral fact, maybe this is just me as well. I feel like if you say there is a truth, you are talking like there is a fact of the matter, and I feel like that's not helping your argument. But so what he's saying here is there might not be ones that are absolute, i.e. there aren't ones that would be true for mind-independent beings, for sake of argument. They are mind-dependent. So he's saying there are moral facts because the word moral means it's involved with social environments. So you have to assume that there is a connected network of rational beings, and once you have that state, then there are moral facts. So of course it's not true that there are just across the board for animals, because maybe animals don't count as this like social network, talking about certain animals too. And it's not true for mind-independent things that there would be this caring for other beings as such. That's confusing and really hard for us to talk about. What he's saying is just that once you have these rational set of people together, the moral facts drop out from that because the moral is dependent on that social situation. The way out for you is, his argument is about, imagine an idealized version of yourself. Okay, that idealized version of yourself would point to the moral fact. So what he's saying is, every person who ever makes an idealized version of themselves would point to the same fact. Your way out is to say that that's not the case. That he might go, my idealized version of myself says that killing is wrong and that torturing babies for fun is wrong. But you might say, well, maybe, I'll use the psychopath example in a second, but maybe you can say, my idealized version of myself might still agree that torturing babies is wrong, but I wouldn't agree that killing in all situations is wrong, because the idealized version of myself points to a different situation. That would be your way out, because then you would start to say, even with the idealized state, there's a source of disagreement. And that's where maybe you elevate the disagreement argument to a higher level. So I think that's a point that you should make. And I think that's what he was trying to encourage you to do. And that's where I think you should go. Now, the psychopath might... There's an example...
If I can just jump in, just that psychopath example, if you have a psychopathic idealized version of yourself...
Exactly.
That's my point. That's
Exactly.
a contradictory notion. You can't have an idealized version of yourself has full access to every other person's experience.
Okay, good.
Psychopath is not like psychopath
good.
lacks empathy. So how can there can't be an idealized observer.
Okay, but he might retort, being cognitive relativist, and I imagine this would fit in there. He might say, well, it doesn't really matter whether a person has empathy or not. You know, just because we think that empathy is a requirement for a human being doesn't mean it is a requirement for a human being. He might say that.
The whole point of the ideal observer thing is there's no objective reason for me to privilege my own interests over any other person. So the only objective means of going about things, the only fact of the matter regarding the way to go about things is to take into account, as you said, this network of individuals. And that's the justification for the ideal observer. It's not just something that you're putting in.
A branch of... Sorry, Mayor.
I'm sorry, I think Charlotte wanted to make it.
So, why would having all knowledge as an ideal observer, say you and I have this fictional idealized version of yourself, why would we point to the same thing?
Ultimately, I agree with you that we all each have non-moral goods which will lead us to desire subjectively different things. But that's because we are ultimately, as I said in my presentation, we're in a bias, and we don't really have access to all the full facts. The reason why it would lead us to the same conclusion is because an ideal observer, in a sense, is not susceptible to all these personal biases and subjectivities. They're looking at the natural world, and if all these observers are looking at the same natural world, then they're going to come to the same conclusion, at the same moral fact. So there's still going to be a fact of the matter, because we're all looking at the same natural world in a sense.
Sure, we might all be looking at the same natural world, but you're making an argument of human flourishing. But if we don't take recourse to any subjective values, right?
But I showed life can have epistemologically objective values, so it's not subjective.
Right, but the ideal objective observer who doesn't have any subjectivities, as you were saying, is ideal, has all knowledge. He's pretty much just like a rock floating in space. I mean, say an asteroid hits the Earth one day, or it doesn't hit the Earth the next day. Why would the idealized objective observer, whatever, why would he say, oh, situation A, the rock hits the Earth, is worse than situation B where the rock doesn't hit the Earth?
Alright, firstly, I agree, I can see what you're trying to say with the analogy, but firstly, a rock is not a moral agent, so it's sort of hard to see what...
Right.
Well, I agree with so just your premise. An ideal observer is basically, in regards to the rock example, it's going to be non-morally bad, because subjectively we're all going to be gone, and that's bad because it frustrates all of our desire. But in terms of the moral fact of the matter, I don't see any. A better example would be exterminating all of humankind. Okay, but to give a rock analogy,
a rational agent exterminating all humankind.
Yeah, exactly. So
that's what he
I
means.
showed you from Railton's account how life can have epistemologically objective values, and that is independent of sort of subjectivity. It's looking at the facts concerning life. So they would make that evaluation that life is valuable. And the ideal observer at the end of the day is making, I think you're asking, what is the ideal observer deciding based on? Now they're deciding based on how to best maximize the amount of non-moral good amongst these individuals. Because we all have non-moral goods. Now when we move on a societal level, these moral goods, taking into account the interests of other people, become moral goods, become moral values. So in a sense, the ideal observer, by taking into account other people's interests and desires and everything, by definition, that's moral. So that's what morality is. So that's...
Hasan has a...
Sorry.
Do you want to add on to that?
No, I mean, can you go back to just repeat your argument about why life is objectively valuable?
Alright, do you mind if I go back to my slide? I'll just show you. So, but you do agree with me that there can be epistemologically objective values?
Not so far, but please keep going.
Alright, so just to establish that, I think there are certain facts which are epistemologically objective, okay? And these, like for example, statements like the radius of the Earth is 6,400 kilometers, you're not going to find the concept of kilometers looking through a telescope out into the universe. That is sort of a measuring system that we have devised, but it still allows us to construct statements which are epistemologically objective. So that statement, the radius of the Earth is 6,400 kilometers, that's not my opinion, that's a fact of the matter, right? Now, we can extend this to values. So I gave an example that doesn't relate to values and is still objective, but I'm extending this to values and showing that they can be objective if you have an idealized version of yourself.
Okay, so the difference between this fact and the ontologically objective
is the ontologically objective is just independent, like 1 + 1 = 2.
And the next one is 6,400 kilometers. Even if I die today, it's still
Exactly right. So you still like.
What's the difference?
So okay, at the end of the day, they're both objective. So you see how they're both objective facts of matter. The difference is they both involve an idealized standard or an idealized observer. And the fact that there's an observer there, the fact that they're idealized, still preserves the objectivity. So we've established you can have epistemologically objective values. So in regards to life, I'll just finish on this. Sorry. As I said, an idealized observer will examine facts like human biology, psychology, history, society. The fact that we avoid pain, we seek pleasure, we avoid these sorts of things. Now, these things are non-morally good for us. Not saying it's therefore morally good. They're non-morally good. But since I said morality is social, you extend that to take everybody's interests into account. You recognize that life is the ultimate precondition for getting all these other epistemologically objective values. So life is going to be the ultimate, unless it's suicidal, it's going to be the ultimate value that an ideal observer would discern. Maybe you can discuss further after. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
The point you mentioned is that Abbas at the beginning that it is a fallacy. For example, if you say that everything is relative, then your sentence is relative, or it's absolute.
Like that's an absolute truth, as you say. Or
in logic, that's a well-known mistake. You can look it up. It's called essential primary prediction versus devoted to subject versus technical common prediction. So I give you.
Sure, but that statement was made that this particular philosophical system is true. Is that absolutely true?
I explain it to you. There's a logical mistake.
Sure.
For example, you ask me what is the meaning of meaningless. I tell you meaningless means there is no meaning. And then you come to me and say, well, you said meaningless. Meaningless, you said there is no meaning, but you define the meaning for it. Can you see where the mistake is?
Yeah, I think that's. I think you're using it in a different context, but that doesn't show that there can't be any sort of. Are you okay?
See, in logic.
But are you saying that because of this logical system, therefore there cannot be any absolute truth at all? Is this an implication of it?
No, there is no implication. But I'm saying you cannot use this argument in logic because we have a subject in logic. We have a subject.
Sure.
We have a predicate.
For that situation, it's different though. It's not saying there's no such thing as meaninglessness. There is such a thing as meaninglessness, and it's defined by something not having meaning. So you can point to something in the world having meaninglessness, but can you point to, can you point to, when you say a sentence like, there is no truth, full stop,
That's
you have to accept that that is true
Yeah.
in order to think there is no truth.
Because
it doesn't work for meaninglessness. You don't go, like it would only work for meaninglessness if you said there's no such thing as
like all statements are meaningless.
Yeah,
that statement I just said has meaning. That's the point I'm trying to make.
That would be self-refuting.
Yeah.
But asking the question, what is the meaning of meaningless, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
When he's saying there is no truth, he's accepting that that sentence is the truth beyond which there is no truth. For example, you say that nothing in the world is existing. Or for example, you say everything in the world is changing, except this sentence, except it changes.
Okay, I would simply have to ask for the justification for that exception that you make. In that case that you make, yes, I understand that there's an exception because that thing you're saying is a statement. And statements are just statements. You write them down, they're not going to change. But I don't agree. I think there's certain, like for example, take the law of identity in logic that A equals A. I mean, that's in a sense a fundamental, that is absolute truth in a sense. I mean, you wouldn't deny the law of identity, you wouldn't deny the law of non-contradiction. Sure, you can point to all these little quandaries in there, but I don't think you can really advance that to a level where you can say that there is no truth.
No, I don't want to imply from
Yeah.
You cannot use this.
No, I'm just saying in response to your question, I don't agree that I'm doing the logical thing.
Yeah, but then number two is that you say epistemological objectiveness, but I think you failed to explain what epistemology is. Number two, there's been a discussion. What's the source of knowledge? Because epistemology is the matter of what's the root of knowledge. I can say that my source of knowledge is science. My source of knowledge is experimentation. My source of knowledge is religion. My source of knowledge is intuition. Okay, so what you have used is science. Okay.
Yes.
So science is a matter of verification. Science is changing.
Right, but I'm not just using verifications. I also use philosophical arguments, and I've appealed to philosophy in response to some of your statements. And also, I think
to define the limit of your epistemological source.
Sure.
What's the limit of your? Before you answer, and the third question that I was going to say, what's the source of morality? We talk about moral facts, but what's the source of morality?
I think Ali had as well, and then.
So that's the two questions.
Sure, no worries. Okay, I'll happily respond to the first one. So you asked me three, I answered the first one, I answered the second. Did you want to say anything? So I think I explained what epistemologically objective means. I said that there are mind-independent facts, and that's ontological objectivity, and there can be mind-dependent facts, and this is epistemological objectivity.
What's the source of that? If you say
what's the source?
If you say the radius is 6 whatever kilometer, but I can tell you science is changing. That is not.
Alright, but it doesn't negate the fact of the matter that the rest of the Earth is still going to be some kilometers long, independent of my attitude.
So
it doesn't negate that fact.
If you define your epistemological objectiveness as that, then the implication is that your reference point is science. So then you need to conclude your morality from scientific perspective.
Not necessarily. I'm saying that science can inform morality, but I'm saying we need philosophy to actually ultimately decide what we mean by terms like good and bad. Maybe we can talk about it after.
I had a comment and then Shahid.
No answer to that question.
So in regards to where
Where's
does morality come from? Alright, source of morality. So I actually want to say something about this in regards to theism especially, because I think that's probably where you're headed in regards to where does morality come from. In regards to that, so firstly, where does morality come from? I think I've given an account of where it comes from. It comes from considering, the fact that there are certain non-moral goods which are not morally good for us. Extending that to take into account everybody's interest becomes a moral good. That's morality. Now you ask me. Now you might take an alternative position and say, look, I don't find this picture coherent. There has to be a theistic framework, right? Now there's a couple of problems with that. Firstly, there's a problem of moral ontology. When you say, for instance, that God is, for example, synonymous with goodness, how can you say such a statement without any prior idea of what good is? No, I'm just saying in general that there's no really good alternative to what I'm saying. So you can say that, for instance, that theism, that God is good by nature, but you've already defined good as that which is relevant to God's nature.
So you believe in natural theory.
No, it's fully compatible with theism. I'm just attacking the.
You haven't answered the question directly. Ask you what is the source of the morality?
Okay,
say rationality.
Rationality?
Yeah, independent moral reason.
Naturalistic perspective.
Yes, it's a naturalistic perspective.
He's saying the source of morality is emotion. So both of you.
Exactly, that's what I want to say.
No, that's why I gave the example. Right, I gave the example. I gave Darwin's example of the bees and how these bees can use rationality and if as a thought experiment, if they indulge in human rationality, they could take a step back and reflect. Sure, there are emotional attitudes we have, but I'm sure there's no faculty, right?
Actually, I believe that your presentation is more in supporting, like you're supporting the same thing, but I'm gonna tell it later.
No.
We've got Ali on the queue. We've got other people, so Ali, you go.
Sorry if I wasn't clear enough.
It's good.
I got the idea there was a strong correlation between society and morality.
Exactly, that's what
And I had a thought experiment with a guy living by himself down in Antarctica or the Arctic, whatever he chooses, whatever's more moral for him. And how would you define morality for him? Is there any more about someone who's not?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting scenario. Well, imagine like there was only one person in existence. Does it make sense to ask, what's moral? I don't necessarily think so. Because think about it, I'm not saying that morality comes from society.
You still have moral statements about doing things to yourself. For example, suicide is immoral.
Right, and then I would simply.
And we talk about things like this in society and how it affects others in society.
I would simply then refer to the way I demonstrated the value of life as a psychological objective, and that would show why it's not only is it non-morally good, but it's also morally bad, and also
So
the whole thing
is
is
that a hint that we should take the social thing out of this, that we can perhaps define morality without any reference to society?
I'm not.
That could come in aid of your
Right, it can, but what I'm basically saying is there are some moral facts which arise when you take into account a society, and some moral facts which exist whether or not you take into account society.
But you changed it now.
Sorry?
This was now, you changed your statement now. Because
In what sense?
what I've written, that was exactly my point. Because if you believe that morality is a social, it's developed.
Yeah, okay, to clarify that, I would say that killing yourself would be non-morally bad for you, and killing others would be
Morally bad.
Do you believe morality is
frustrating your designs. That's what the dictionary definition of bad is. But I'm not using that.
Morally bad.
Not morally bad, meaning bad as in, if somebody stabs you, you feel pain, that's subjectively that's bad for you. But that's subjective.
Well, that's true, but as I said again, you actually, it's supporting his statement.
I don't agree that I am. you're assuming that the only position of realists can take is absolutism.
No, not absolutism, but from my understanding, maybe I'm wrong, but from my understanding, you're actually more supporting the relativist.
Right, but you explain why.
Here's Hasan, you're right, but see what Hasan would say is that I'm objective, I'm a realist because I believe in epistemic objectivity, and he does not. He doesn't believe that distinction.
Exactly.
So they're pretty much arguing the same thing, but Hasan will take a step further and say this is objective reality because epistemologically how to find it.
I agree with you. I think
But I don't think I'm saying that torturing babies for fun. It's wrong regardless.
That's a particular
but,
example.
Right.
I guess you are two categories of the same topic.
Right.
Both of you are relativists, but with different approach. Because your principle is that the morality is developed based on the social.
No. This is completely wrong. I'm not saying that morality is based on social evolution. I'm saying morality is a thing that functions, that has a societal function. And most moral statements only make sense within a societal framework. I'm not saying we have a vote and decide, if 51% decide the Holocaust is right, then we go ahead.
Based on your example.
Well, based on my framework, yes. You consider the idealized desire.
2,000 years ago, was it bad?
Sorry?
2,000 years ago, was it bad?
Well, I'm saying yes, it was always bad because I'm a moral realist.
If I tell you, for example, some religions legalize slavery, what would you say?
They were wrong.
They were wrong. Objectively wrong, because this is why they're wrong. Because I just okay, but this is the problem. You're just if I can clarify this point, you're saying there's moral disagreement, therefore there cannot be moral facts, and that's false. Just because it's disagreement.
Moral evolution.
All right, fair enough. I'm saying
I'm people 2,000 years ago.
Sure. Okay.
Based on that.
Okay.
It's a very well-known. I forgot the terminology. Well-known things in philosophy that people in the past you cannot judge them based on their things.
Okay.
And now,
okay.
I ask you another question.
Yeah, sure. But before you jump to the other question,
Questions from
just enjoying the debate thing.
sorry, just before. I just want to clarify on that. So how can we condemn, for example, how can we condemn other societies and cultures? It's simple. I reduce moral facts to natural facts, and these natural facts are referring to the same natural world. So in a sense, I can still condemn them. They were wrong about these natural facts.
He's killing that. I have another. He's killing that.
I think I've answered it.
If I defend myself, what would you say?
If
I defend myself, someone in my country, I want to.
Well, if you kill someone for you have to give a context. If you kill someone for no justification,
contextual.
This is the problem. You're assuming moral realism is independent of any circumstances.
I don't believe moral. Well, I'm saying contextual.
But why are you assuming that moral realism is independent of circumstances? Why are you assuming that it's a platonic?
That's not moral realism.
Yes, it can be. Ethical naturalism, reductive moral realism.
I think you just have
That's
to
very
You should say contextual moral realism.
Exactly. Ethical naturalism.
Moral facts can. Sorry. Non-moral facts. Yeah. Moral facts can be highly dependent on the situation as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of a good example though.
Why don't I just speak to certain moral facts? Killing is bad. Killing in this situation is not bad. They were just two separate moral
That's
facts.
kind of what it is. The problem is, I think we reduce our sentences too easily, too quickly. But that doesn't mean that the fact of the matter doesn't exist.
What's saying killing is I have to agree. That's not moral realism.
This guy was giving me an advice. Just shout it out because they're not going to stop.
That's why I stopped everybody.
Exactly. It looks like you were coming from a subjective stance by the way you were talking.
No, I believe in contextual moral realism.
Because I was going to say the one thing, if you look at law, there's natural law. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And I believe Abbas was saying that there are no moral facts. So if you say there are no moral facts, why do we have natural laws in place?
Look, natural laws are subjected to human observation. And
I'll just stop you for a second. Natural law is defined as law made by God. You believe in God.
well, let's not talk about God and theology, okay? But let's just discuss just the idea of objectivity. Can you really acquire absolute objectivity?
You can acquire absolute objectivity. I believe you can acquire that based on observation and also
I know, yeah.
what you pass on from people.
Okay, but can you observe the world outside of being you?
or you might be going to a metaphysical realm. And
No, it's not metaphysical. It's a common sense. Because basically, your eyes observe the world in a very particular way. Your ears perceive hearing in a very particular way. Your senses perceive things in a very different way. And it's not the absolute way, it's a relativized way. Right? So there could be other life forms, let's suppose that there are, which we can't observe, but it shouldn't mean that it doesn't exist just because we don't observe it. Right? So it's the same thing with observation. Just because you observe it doesn't necessarily mean that it is as you observe it. It's a matter of framework. As far as your framework is concerned, as far as my framework is concerned, yes, it does seem as if there are natural laws. But that should not posit the fact that there are objective, absolute natural laws.
So what about the regularities that those natural laws refer to, which are actually in the universe, which are independent of our mind? Are they objective?
Well,
But before Abbas, you come to me ask
I just wanted to say, I just wanted important to say that that moral facts have already been established a long time ago.
how?
You can't say if you look at it from a law perspective, it's if you believe in religion, following the commandments, the commandments that have been established, and those commandments stand as moral facts. Like for example, thou shalt not murder. Would you consider that to be a moral fact that has been established a long time ago? That's what I was saying.
It's evolved in our psyche for a very long time. That's my argument. It's evolved in our psyche. It's developed in our psychology. In our psyche.
Yeah.
It's,
what makes you say that?
what makes me say that? Well,
It's
there are.
in our psyche. Because killing somebody, isn't that something we're wrong to?
Killing someone. Look, killing someone is a wrong. It's a wrong only as far as social conventions are concerned. You know what I mean? It is not a wrong. Okay. It is not a wrong which is universally recognizable.
Wow.
And I don't see how anyone here can argue against it.
Going back to
Before you go, she will be second. She's the new one, alright.
You know, like, we're talking about killing and, we call murder and stuff like that. In some countries, for example, if you're a person, you kill a baby or whatever, something wrong. For example, in China, and you will be, having this death sentence. But in other countries, for example, it is banned. Like, you can't kill anyone because they are murder. Like, like it is also depends on the type of society and the rules and the laws they're making.
Yeah. No, I think I responded to that by saying that, look, I accept that there are moral disagreements, but as I said, in principle, the fact that there's disagreement doesn't tell you there's no truth of the matter. In science, there's disagreement about string theory and quantum mechanics, interpretation of quantum mechanics. That doesn't mean that there's no fact of the matter. And under my picture, people can be wrong about these things. I can condemn, people for killing people, for the Holocaust. The fact that people have a different opinion to me doesn't mean that I have to somehow honour that opinion or respect that opinion as that would be the relativist position, which I'm being accused of tonight. I don't know why. But on the other hand, I'm not. Yeah. So as a realist, I can simply say that these people are wrong.
I just have a little thing to say that according to human rights,
Right.
all of us have a right to,
Sure. But the question of tonight's debate is
in
meta-ethics,
some
which
countries,
is
for example, it's easy to kill someone because they even have a idea of, for example, idea of Karl Marx.
exactly. But was Karl Marx an idealized observer who was in power? No. So I don't have to respect what Karl Marx has to say. I can look at the natural world.
So, can we go back to your discussion about non-moral goods?
Yes.
And so you define non-moral goods as those things that are necessary for.
Yeah, basically just things that we think are good for us.
Desires in life.
Yeah, so for example, Railton says an individual's non-moral goods consists... Sorry, I'll just go to it to make it clear. Yeah, so Railton says individuals' non-moral good consists in what they would want to pursue, where they contemplate their present situation from a standpoint, fully informed, basically things that we would want for ourselves. So it is subjective from that standpoint. But to get from non-moral subjective good to non-moral objective good, that's where the idealized epistemological, the objective observer comes in.
Okay, and so why would I want, or rather, let's take into consideration for myself, right? I have an idealized version of myself, and my non-moral goods depends on what I want out of my life, my subjectivity, right? So why should I care about what the rest of society thinks?
Sure. I answered that representation by saying that there is no objective reason for privileging one particular set of interests over another. So the whole thing about morality is, it's all about, in a sense, taking into account other people's point of view. And if you privilege your own frame of reference and say, look, these things are good for me, I'm going to do them. That's just your subject. That's not a fact of the matter.
Then why we even?
So the reason why we're doing it is because the reason why we're doing it is because that is the most objective. That is how we get to the fact of the matter. The most objective position is not to privilege a particular point of view or a particular frame of reference, but to consider all the relevant facts. If you, for example, were, if someone was, for example, a child molester, and they thought, that was, and for them, that was non-morally good. Now, that person asks, why should I care about other people? Well, if you think about it like this, that person ultimately lacks access to the types of experiences that the victim is having. They would, if an idealized version of themselves would recognize that the pain that they're causing would outweigh any sort of pleasure that would be gained from that activity.
Why is that, though? Why would an idealized version?
Because again, idealized version of yourself is taking into account the other all the interesting experiences.
Why should an idealized version?
Why should they take into account?
Why do you make that leap? Because think about, say,
it's not a leap. It's just the most objective. It's the default position. Why should you privilege your own point of view?
I think he means to say, why would the idealized version, taking in all the facts, why would all those facts include something like that?
Because that is still counts as a fact. There can be mind-dependent facts. Facts about psychology, biology, rationality. These are all the things that we take into account when we make moral evaluation. So why wouldn't they take these things into account?
There might be mind-dependent facts. Sorry,
mind-dependent.
Yeah, there might be mind-dependent facts, but someone taking in all the facts might find that there aren't any mind-dependent facts regarding how you behave with other people, or
But the fact that they are facts means that they would take them into account into their ontology of facts. They're still facts. So if there are these facts, then
you're saying it's the fact that it matters. It matters. That's.
I'm saying the impartial position is to take into account other people's perspective. There's no what objective reason do you have for privileging your own interests? There is none.
Right. Yeah, so that's just like a first principle.
Yeah, exactly. Why should we privilege one particular?
I think there is one thing that's not clear. I think Abbas wants to try to explain morality from individual point of view, not individual, but more theoretical. But you're trying to more to talk about the social orders or the relationship. Because most of your explanations and examples are actually, you can see that you're related to society and stuff.
Right, but before I got to society, I spoke about non-moral goodness.
Yeah,
it relates to the individual. So it's not completely isolated.
Yeah, but I think there's no solid explanations about like what is morality itself, because I think there's a difference between the reality of morality and the truth of morality. The reality could change over time based on geography, or based on everything, based on a lot of factors like society, history, all of that. But the truth of something wouldn't change. Like the gold atom is gold atom over the whole life of the universe. But you might change the situation of the environment to make different materials.
Sure, and that's the same in morality. For example, in some cases, killing is more introducible, but that doesn't mean there's no fact of the matter about killing.
Let me explain that. So, Abbas once tried to investigate the gold atom itself in that example, but you're trying to talk about the compounds that are made of this gold atom. So for me, I think that would be more fundamental to discuss what is the reality itself, rather than relating it to social philosophy and social theory.
I'm going to try and describe again what his view is, maybe hopefully in a different way.
Yeah.
So it helps, I think, to have a definition separate of a rational agent. Okay, rational agent, there could be a being, an alien. Like it could be, let's just say there's a planet out there with cats, right? For all other purposes, they look like cats to us, but they have rational minds. they are therefore a rational being. Okay? So rational beings don't have to include us, right? I think it helps to separate that first, to not include ourselves in this, because then I think it confuses matters. So what he's saying is, as soon as you get rational beings, no matter what they look like, they could be, okay, the cat, the rational cat we talked about, they could be a blob, like a giant amoeba that has a rational mind.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. As soon as you put these rational beings, no matter what they look like, as long as they have a rational mind, and put them together into a network, the very act of them being in a network, doesn't matter what are the facts there are, doesn't matter if there's a geography, doesn't matter if it's on another planet, doesn't matter if they have, they're in a certain time, that by the act of them being in a network and doing this objective action of going, I desire these things for myself, and I realise that this other rational being, like me, would also desire things for itself, therefore the correct thing for me to do is not to just do whatever I want, but to realise that I should look after their needs as well.
See, there is a problem here, talking about
But
gaining relationship to, society. What I'm saying is, if you could prove it for yourself, that based on actually rational one, that I think what Abbas was trying to do, if you could rationalize all those morality principles without relating it to the society, then you have pure morality.
The thing is, you're speaking about free-floating morality,
Yeah,
but morality has a social function.
For example, if you go to, some of the trips in, I don't know, in Africa or in Asia or in America or in, other countries, there are a set of rules that are, accepted as completely moral things. Where, for example, America, US, they send some of the humanitarian, trips over the Africa for some of the tribes over there, and they start talking about, oh, these people are very, they're not moral, they don't actually follow the morality. But I thought this is wrong, because for that society, right?
But isn't it just whatever maximizes the happiness? So if the behaviors of that society maximize their happiness, then it's actually moral.
See, I don't have any problem with what you're saying. I understand it, but what I'm saying is that this is not a solid definition of morality itself. But it's still
what type of definition do you want us to provide?
I think what Abbas was trying is, if you could define, like, for example, in physics, if you want to define a specific concept, if you start bringing examples and side derivations, and you're still not getting to the heart of the problem.
Sure, like for example in physics, you want to bring that up, like in physics we understand from relativity that the world is four-dimensional entity. And if you look at the definition of dimension, there's many definitions of that. But does that mean that we can't
No, you could.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying that, your explanation of morality for me is very general. And it's more...
That's the point, because I'm talking about meta-ethics. What is good at all? Like that's the whole point.
But it's not, how to say it, it's not the fundamental meaning of morality. You're not defining the morality itself, but you're defining what is related to morality.
Yeah, but isn't people's happiness good in and of itself? So isn't that like, can't you just accept that as the first principle? Like if I said
it's not moral good.
Yeah, if I said to you that that the greatest enjoyment for everyone is preferable to the greatest misery for everyone, can you accept that?
No, I agree with you, but I ask you questions. I completely, maybe this example will solve the problem.
Yeah.
If you have someone grows up in a place that there's no one around, like, what's feral child? As they call it, right? So, do you think that child would develop the same set of morality naturally?
I'm going to say no, because they're not in an environment where morality is...
Exactly, so that is point.
No.
Yeah, but so then that point will
support you. Actually, disagreement.
Let me just complete my statement. Just let me complete my statement. My argument is that if that's the case, that there is no such a absolute morality within humanity that will push you, like, we've got some natural forces based on evolution to move you toward, some sort of developing personalities and, looking for mates and all these things that drives you to get to that step of, psychological mind or whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But there is nothing that will push you toward morality.
Yeah.
So in that case, then I think what Abbas was saying is true. Yeah, and actually you were complementing each other, because then you would say that, true, there is no absolute, but there is some moral principle that's developed based on society. So it's not such a thing as pure morality.
I think you're equivocating. It's still absolute. Exactly. If you replay those circumstances, let's say you've got a situation X, and every time that you have the same circumstances in situation X, whatever the moral act is, it will always be that way, right?
Yeah.
But why for that child it's not the case?
I think you're equivocating. Firstly, we have to separate two things here. Firstly, you keep bringing up disagreement, and I think I addressed that adequately.
No, which one?
You're saying, okay, this child develops differently, they're going to have different moral norms. I'm saying
No, I'm not saying they're going to have different.
What
I'm
you
saying
saying?
it's not going to have one.
But
There is none.
None, exactly, which is my point about reality being this, what you described as
that's exactly, so that's what I'm saying.
No, but the difference between me and Abbas is when Abbas talks about morality being social, he's saying that society determines the criteria for judging right and wrong. No.
Yeah, but this is there is none, but you develop it.
Yes. No, this is okay. So Abbas said that morality, so society in a sense decides, society decides the criteria for judging right and wrong. When I say morality is part of societal function, I'm not saying we ask society what's moral. I'm saying that morality is a thing that works when you have this network of people who are able to have this experience.
So
I'm not saying society is determining the
entity inside you.
Sorry?
Do you think it exists already inside you and it gets activated?
No, I'm saying the facts about the natural. I'm saying the facts about the natural world.
Yeah, but what you're saying, for me, I'm getting that you say there is something inside everybody that is not activated until.
No. I'm saying that when you consider from the point of an idealized observer facts about humanity, you arrive at these moral facts.
Okay, so
I don't believe in a transcendent sort of view of
No. So you believe there is no such a thing that no such a force inside.
I'm not the
I think you could say if you have rationality, if someone grows up to be rational and rationality is inside them, part of them, then I would say yes, and that would agree with him still.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if rationality is inside you and rationality is what gets you morality, then morality is inside you in virtue of having rationality.
You don't own the rationality. You develop rationality.
Exactly.
That's the point.
But we develop rationality in virtue of us having certain properties, namely having a brain that has certain properties.
But in developing rationality, we develop rationality and eventually we're able to do calculus, we're able to do science.
You become more conscious. So, for example, you look at the evolution. So there are things today that is very against morality, but when you compare it 1,000 years ago, like, when you were looking at the beheading on the TV, I mean, 1,000 years ago, not only in Middle East, because at the moment they're all focused on Arabs and Middle East, but there are even worse than that in Europe and other countries, which was normal things to execute people.
But you use disagreement again? Because that's what I'm getting from your argument. What are you trying to say?
Because he can explain it away by saying people can get confused.
Exactly.
People can be convinced by others.
You're using the Earth was flat. Does that mean that it was once flat?
No, of course, exactly. But my point is, you just answered it. You said you don't believe there is such a thing.
I think that certain aspects of morality are innate. I can accept what Abbas says on that. But I don't agree that therefore there's no facts to that.
No, he didn't say that. He said, that's what I'm saying.
But he does disagree with me that he thinks there's no fact of the matter cross-culturally as to what's good and bad.
Yeah, well, I mean...
So we're not complimenting
Of course. But my point here is that...
Sorry, I don't want to know.
I don't know if I'm clear or not, but that's what was my point. So both of you agree that there is not such a thing as pre-existed ethical morality
ontologically objective values
in humanity, and we develop the morality.
Okay, two separate things here.
Or we activate.
I said in my presentation I don't believe in mind-independent values. If that's what you're referring to as in this.
No. It's
now, do you think? Are you asking me? Do I think that humans have the capacity for moral evaluation? Yes. Can that moral evaluation be flawed in some sense? Yes, it can.
No. That's not my point, because with the because you're on the side of relativism. Realism. Yeah, sorry, and he's the one.
Yeah.
So I'm saying if you're
a realist, how do you account for the fact that people disagree?
No. If you're a realist, then you have to believe there is such a thing, pre-existed morality in humanity.
No, this is okay.
If not, then you can't call each other realist.
No, because moral realism is simply the position that there are moral facts. That sentence, there are moral facts, is you can look at it in many different ways,
Yeah.
and there's many different philosophical ideas of what objectivity is, what facts are. So you can't say, look, if you're a moral realist, you have to believe that there's this non-natural, transcendent thing.
From my understanding of reading realist point of view, if you're a realist, you have to believe, or you have to kind of...
No, there's different types of realism.
But then, as Abbas said, that's kind of, I don't want to say the word, but that's kind of justifying things. You know, you're saying the same thing as the
relativism. The relativist is saying we cannot condemn people, for example, who
No, that's the conclusion that some of them they make.
No.
The principle they have
Right.
is that
Okay, fine. The principle being that cross-culturally. Okay. I'm getting to the principle. So the principle being that cross-culturally there is no fact of the matter about morality. Would you agree that's what
I don't think that's the principle.
What are they
That's
saying?
the conclusion.
What's the principle?
So you're talking about the conclusion that both parties are making.
Can you tell me what the principle?
The principle, for me, from what you understand, maybe.
Yeah.
But I believe the relativists, they believe there is no such a thing as like some pre-existent morality within humanity.
Oh, okay.
And with the realist, you believe no, there is such a thing that could be activated, or whatever you were talking about. So you were talking about the conclusion of this.
I think your claim is slightly different. Okay, it's more about what is the nature of being a human being.
Yeah.
But that's not really the discussion that's being had here.
Yeah,
So I think you guys are talking past each other.
But that's my point for him, because if he hasn't talked about that, because I think that's the biggest debate between these two sides. That one believe that there is such a thing, it's predeterministic, it's
But
there.
if you believe there's a fact of the matter, there's different ways you can go about it. I can believe there's a fact of the matter, and I can say that it's absolute, every single situation clearly was wrong. Or I can say, look, there are cases where taking a life isn't necessarily wrong, and there are cases where it's absolutely wrong. And the fact that it's absolutely, objectively wrong is realism.
But again, you're using relativist approach to say that's absolute.
It's simply, okay, why do you assume that for there to be a fact of the matter, there has to be absolutism? You have to justify that.
No,
that's the assumption you're bringing in.
No, I'm not
that's the assumption.
I'm saying from,
why
this
is
is
this
a claim from the realist point of view. I'm not saying I'm saying that.
Right.
So from my understanding, the relativist...
But from my understanding, that's not what realism is saying. There are some forms of reason to say that Railton is a moral realist. He doesn't say that. Why does he say that? He's still a moral realist.
Okay, then if that's the case...
So you're saying that his moral realism is not actual moral realism?
If that's the case, and then I believe he's not really different from relativists. They just have different conclusions.
No.
Because...
If they have different conclusions, they have different principles.
No, that's my confusion. That's what I'm saying. And if he's claiming such a thing, you're not a realist anymore.
Why does realism have to be... why for there to be
That's the same
matter?
as if you compare classical physics with quantum physics.
Right.
So with the classic physics, we had deterministic laws. So if you repeat an experiment, you're sure if you do it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, you're going to get the same answer. This is deterministic, like what is it? Cause and effect. But when the quantum physics came in, they said, no, we're not going to accept that anymore. We don't believe in determinism anymore.
Right.
Because if we want to measure the position of an electron in a hydrogen atom, if you do it 1 million times, you're going to get different positions. So therefore, if you're doing that experiment, shooting an electron through a hydrogen atom, you're going to get different results every time. So that was the battle between the classical physics and quantum physics.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that, this is from my understanding, is the same situation with the realist and relativist. Because the realist should have something that, okay, there is some predeterministic factors.
I like that analogy because if you take the analogy further, the relativists would say that if you for example, if you examine, okay, so there's different areas of physics, classical and quantum. The relativists would say that tomorrow physics will change and physics will be different, and there's no fact of the matter as to what the actual physics is. But I'm saying, look, there are physical laws which are regularities, and there's a fact of the matter about them.
So as a physicist,
so using that analogy,
one thing.
Do you understand?
Yeah. That's one of the main, very usual mistakes people make when they talk about science changing, like what Hasan was saying. Science doesn't change. All right. So, for example, so not only that. So looking over, for example, Euclidean geometry. So it's looking only at 2D, right? It works only on 2D.
Take a sphere.
Yeah. But then, before the general relativity, mathematicians they discovered open geometry and closed geometry. So that's to do with things, it works in 3D. So people start talking about, oh, the Euclidean geometry is wrong, it's changed. But that's a very big mistake. It's not wrong, it's working on the 2D. So when you want to work on 3D, you have to use different geometry. So science is not changing, only, you know, exactly, right? So again, you know, you jump into the conclusion.
Right, but these are different dimensions as in completely different areas of reality. Different civilizations are not different parts of reality, they're just different civilizations.
Okay, so to make it maybe,
So I think that the problem is, like, we're just focusing on too short of a rule, like, it's always bad to kill. I think we need to give a few more qualifiers, and then it will become a universal law, right? So it's always bad to kill for fun if there's no benefit that will come of it to society. So that can be an absolute rule across.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone can pretty much agree.
yeah, but can you prove without giving those examples, killing is bad?
Yeah,
without saying, okay,
so
there is a benefit.
why is it bad? Killing is bad because we accept the first principle of that. You should maximize happiness in society.
Again, you know.
But I can't do that any further.
With all due respect, I agree with what you're saying, I wouldn't go down that path. I think my presentation answered that because I had a reductive approach where I reduced talk about good and bad to talk about the natural fact. So I think I provided an account of why killing people is wrong, and I think I haven't really seen any sort of dispute of it. It's just people saying I don't agree with it.
Can you prove the law of non-contradiction? Can you prove any axiom?
But
apart from just
but you can't. True, but what I'm saying, if you want to have a solid explanation or description of morality, you have to do it independent of giving conditions and situations. Like if it's regardless of having benefit or being harmed.
But that's the first.
That's not even the case of non-moral facts. Special relativity we talked about before about having a framework. I was going to bring this up earlier.
Yeah.
We've realised now that you can't, independent of any framework, find out what motion is. You have to take a framework. That's what special relativity says. And if you agree with that, can't you also think that that's the same case in terms of behaviour?
Yeah,
that in terms of behaviour, you have to take a framework. You can't just look just at yourself. You have to take a different framework of looking at.
Yeah. So then I would say then you have to accept that
No.
morality is a relativist concept.
Okay. You know how to resolve this? How do you define realism and how I define realism is very different. That's why we disagree. You think moral realism can only exist where there's ontological objectivity. But okay, do you think it can only exist where it's independent of any conditions?
Yes.
No.
But you have to define it.
Okay.
It should exist without exactly.
Alright. So what I'm basically telling you is, independent of any conditions, your discourse becomes meaningless.
Why?
How can we speak meaningfully of goodness,
to be honest,
free flowing?
you just reminded me. You had something in your talk. You said that the existence of University of Sydney is independent of me. And I think that's not true.
The building that we call University of Sydney.
If there is no one in this world to be conscious of
the building will still exist.
If we
that's different.
Let's
you
say
might not know, but it might still exist.
no. Let's say we killed all humans today. This building would still remain, and that would be an mind-blowing fact.
No, the building would remain.
Exactly.
The actual entity.
All right, I can change that now.
Wait. You can't. You know why? Because there is no one to stay and prove it.
Yeah.
But you don't need to prove it. Because it just exists.
It exists because you have experienced it. I'll give you an example.
No. Are you an idealist?
I'll give you an example.
Go on.
No. Let's give you a simple example. Can you imagine a world in your imaginations without using your senses or experiences from this world?
No, but I can conceive of it.
No, I can imagine my thoughts still going, unless you count that as a sense.
I want you to make the world
Yes.
without. Yeah, exactly. You can't. It's possible. Right?
That's Hume's bundle theory argument, which is.
I still think I can, but
Yeah.
You can think of a world with analytic truth in it, like that squares have 4 circles. Like you can know that.
Yeah, still use circles. I'm saying
squares have 4 sides.
Yeah. But still you're using the same concept. But my question is, can you imagine a world in your mind without using any experiences from this world?
I can imagine a possible world where there do not exist any human minds and there's nothing incoherent about the
You
scenario.
use the human mind. It's already used something from this world. I'm saying completely from scratch, nothing.
But how
I can come up with triples. I just made them up.
Again,
It
it's
is
used
carried
triple.
on.
There are some things that's called triple. That's you've learned it from this world.
It's really hard. You're trying to say our mind is completely.
But you're trying to say...
Exactly. But
What are you getting at?
I'm having to So now I ask you to do the same thing, but use your experiences from this world. Then you would be able to do it, right? So, I mean, there are pre-deterministic phenomena needed for the existence, right? So my point here is that if there is no one in this world at the beginning, now because you already seen buildings, you already experienced things, then you think that if you didn't exist, this building still would exist. That's because you already have experienced it. But what I'm saying that if there was no conscious mind in this universe, it wouldn't be a difference if it existed.
It's not happening if there's no conscious mind.
Yeah. So if at the beginning of the universe there was no conscious mind, like there was no consciousness, it wouldn't make a difference if it physically existed or didn't exist.
Well, but it still exists. Like,
Yeah,
I don't. That doesn't matter.
You do it now because you have experience. But what I'm saying, that's what I'm talking. Go back to the Big Bang. Okay, the world expands, and there's no consciousness from there to the Big Crunch. What I'm saying that if there was no consciousness, you couldn't claim that it would exist without your independence.
As a naturalist,
Well, you just said if, so you're positing it exists.
Yeah,
I know, but what I'm saying that this is completely depends on us because you have experience.
is it necessary for conscious minds to exist? Can't you conceive of a situation where there are no conscious minds and things still exist? Yes. When you say something exists, as a naturalist, I think something exists if it occupies a position in reality.
I think something exists if you have a consciousness of it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But you can't say this because you're already conscious and you have the experience. So you can't say if I wasn't here, the building would exist. You say that because you already had that predeterministic.
Would the universe would still exist? That's because we know humans
Okay, here's another example. Did you come into being, were you birthed by your mum and dad because you were conscious? No.
The thing is,
but they exist independently of you.
How that relates to what I'm saying?
Because you're saying that you cannot fathom anything existing independent of your mind.
But clearly your parents existed before you did, and therefore they existed independently.
They had to for you to come into existence.
And existed independent of us.
But when your existence doesn't start when you were born from your parents. Exactly.
Okay, well that's taking another view.
Your existence is actually when you become conscious. So that's why I'm saying,
But as a physicalist, I'm not going to find that argument compelling. I don't think that you can have free-floating consciousness or consciousness that's independent of the brain.
Do you get my point now?
I sort of understand what you're trying to say, but I agree with you that there can't be any mind-independent values, if that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And that's what I agree with you. But that doesn't mean.
But then at the end, I think our disagreement is that I believe if you're a realist, you have to believe in a pre-existed fact of morality, and then you can make conclusion after that, of course. But I believe you don't. In your presentation, you actually prove the opposite, which is more close to.
But that's because you take one view of realism, which is fine. I mean,
my idea was, I thought your talk was the conclusion of his talk. I don't know.
I want to bring what you were talking about back to this discussion around.
I just want to address the quiet girl.
Yeah, exactly.
I want them to contribute more.
I'm really enjoying it.
All right, just say what you believe or who you think you like.
Who are judges?
I want to stay outside of this because I'm really enjoying that.
It's hard to tell.
Do you feel more convinced by one side or the other? Maybe that's the best question, yeah?
What is your intuition?
We're not going to accuse you of being right or wrong. Right? Like, just tell us which one you think you're more
which
convinced
person
by.
you think has responded to
What's your intuition? What do you feel?
He's a good psychologist.
Do you feel that are you naturally a realist?
And if you are, you convince otherwise.
Yeah?
I can't put it on anyone that
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's also the opinions, and that's how the opinions.
And there's the issue of definitions as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
We disagree about the language of then
Yeah, exactly.
It's not about language, it's about the concept.
No, you go first.
So I think the distinction here, if I'm wrong, is that you think that realism requires like just flat principles without
Platonic entities.
I think relativism doesn't believe in a framework. The relativists. They don't believe in a fixed or like a fixed principle to derive the morality from it. I mean, this is my understanding from philosophy of ethics. That if you want to be a realist, you have to believe that there is a source, that you're going to derive the morality from that source.
Why can't this philosophical framework be the source?
Yeah.
I'm not saying, but I'm saying that's what I
ask
understand
source,
for
the
realism.
source is maximal happiness.
Yeah. But that's again, that one is not a fixed one. Like for me, being sad maybe it's happiness.
But then that
that's not an ideal.
But he takes that into account.
It's not a fixed. It's not unconditional source. So that source could still be very different. And yes, you're going to derive it. That's my problem. Like the realist tries to find a very fixed point. Like for example, let's put religious people. They believe God is the absolute morality, and then we're going to drive everything.
But that framework is
let's go on the same.
Yeah.
Why is God good?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get. I'm just giving you an example. No. Well, I just wanted to say that's one example of a realist attitude or point of view. That you want to have something fixed, and then you're going to derive everything based on that.
But why do all realists have to adopt that position? I don't know.
See, for me,
I'm a reductive realist.
I know, exactly. So, that's the thing I didn't like about philosophy, and because a lot of you, it was a very good, great presentation. I'm so I don't know. I'm very happy for you, and you've done a good job. But to be honest, at some point I could see there's a game of language there. And logic.
That's the point though, because if you don't get that right, then you can't agree on anything.
I know, but not a pure, like it was more to go around, justify things. Like, he doesn't want to say I'm a relativist. That was the point. But most of his point, maybe I'm wrong, please don't give me
I gave the thought experiment and I said that we have to posit these facts to
I have an example similar to that actually. Yeah, so the example I wanted to bring up I think kind of ties these things together.
I think we'll make it the last comment.
No, okay, so this Mary example I think might be taken from Mary in the Bubble about the colour red, and that's the example I was actually going to give, a similar one. So, okay, so we're going to talk about red. Can every creature see red?
No.
No, right? We see red, humans, because we have a certain
rods and cones,
right? Rods and cones, so that we detect that particular wavelength of light. Let's for now call that the eye, right? We have the human eye that detects these things. Now, bear in mind that this is kind of an analogy for morality, right? The eye seeing, like, imagine that we have a moral eye. Wait, I haven't stopped yet. No, that's not what I mean. Okay. Now, now you would say that any creature that has a human eye would see red, right? And if you had your eyes gouged out, does red still exist? Well, if someone, has that same function, they could see red. If they have that same human eye, they are able to interpret that wavelength as that perception of redness.
But if all the humans were born without eyes.
Okay, does redness exist?
No.
Okay,
I'm actually anti-realist that quality.
Yeah, okay.
But
No, okay.
If
I understand
all
what you mean.
human beings, since their start, they had no eyes. You wouldn't know if color exists or
yeah, sure, we wouldn't know, but that doesn't matter. That's an epistemological concern. It doesn't matter.
But then you couldn't.
No, that
actually
doesn't matter. Way to modify your analogy. There's a tribe in Africa called the Himba who can't they have the same eyes as rods and cones and they can't actually see the color sky blue. If you give them a row of green dots and put one blue dot in the row, they can't actually, if you ask them which colour is different, they can't actually pick out the blue. That's because in their language they have the same word for green and blue. But it's not that they can't name it. They physically can't actually see it. So as an analogy to morality, there is a fact of the matter that that wavelength is 520 nanometers, I don't know why.
Yeah.
But these people, when they look at it, they evaluate it differently. Does that mean there's no fact of the matter about what wavelength?
So they see it as
They see the wave. They see the sky blue color, what we call sky blue, as green.
In other words, their eye is taking the wavelength 521, let's say, for example, and saying it's the same as 523, for example.
Yeah. Does that mean there's no fact of the matter about what actual wavelength is being
Good.
No.
So how did you find that? Or how we found that they have this problem?
Using an epistemologically objective
No.
framework.
Yeah, but
So
make
you
it more.
answer Abbas's opinions on the way you're talking.
What do you mean?
The points you're making seem to be like going in a sense in Abbas's favor.
In what sense? You're all
Say that, but
you know what I mean? I'm saying there can be genuine disagreement, but that disagreement does not entail
ask
the
them a
fact of the
question
matter.
in more details. How we found that there is such a thing in that particular place, and how we found that they see the different color.
The scientists that went there and studied it.
Because we saw blue,
What we call blue. It's not fact
what
of the
we
matter.
call blue, and we found that they don't see that. But if you didn't have that experience before, you wouldn't even pick it up.
Right, but I'm not using.
That's the point.
That doesn't mean it's relative. That's the point I was trying to make with the eye.
In my analogy, I'm not referring to color. I'm not using color to refer to morality. I'm using wavelength to refer to morality. I'm using color. No, it's very important. Very important. No, it's very important. I'm using wavelength to refer to the moral facts, and I'm referring to the color, to the way we make moral judgments, and the way we perceive what's good and bad. The way we perceive good and bad can vary cross-culturally, but the fact that there's a wavelength that stays 521 nanometers is a fact of the matter, and that doesn't change.
You're changing your statement.
I'm not changing my
You
statement.
believe that there is such
I'm
a fixed.
No.
A wavelength is something that
Yes, there are moral facts,
exist.
and people can be wrong about it.
So
That's
now
not changing.
I don't think he's changed. I think he's been the same.
I told you. You said.
I do not have to deny moral disagreement.
I was confused too by what you said. I thought you were talking about something else.
So now you believe there is something.
No.
Oh,
I'll show you my presentation. From the beginning, I said, just the last point, there is an argument people give. The very first point I made, disagreement. There's disagreement in the world. So people think that's a
I'm not
point.
convinced with that example, but what I get from you.
I think it's a perfectly powerful example. I mean,
with that example now, you're saying that there is such a thing that like fixed morality exists, and then.
no, I'm saying there are moral facts. No, I don't like words like fixed and absolute. And
No. A fact is something that has no exception.
epistemologically objective fact.
What I was trying to say with the eye is that it's a fact that if you have this particular eye, you will see the wavelength this way. The thing is, all humans have this eye, so they will see the wavelength 521 as red, right?
Or differently, but it doesn't change the fact that the wavelength is the same.
Right.
Cannot be conditioned.
Okay,
Yes, it can.
I'm not saying.
No, wait. What I'm saying is, red, right? The perception of red is dependent on the fact that you have the eye that sees the wavelength 521. Creatures, you agreed before that some creatures can't see red. Ergo, for example, they cannot see wavelength 521, for example. Okay, right. But that doesn't mean that if they could see it, what I'm trying to say is, if they could see the wavelength 521, they would see red. So what we're trying to say here is, if you think it like, if you have the rational structures there, you'll be able to see morality.
Yeah, but seeing the color is not related.
Okay, this is why I would restate what you said. Does the fact that people see the same wavelength differently mean there's no fact of the matter about what wavelength is actually being given? No. There can be a fact of the matter, and people can disagree about it. That doesn't mean realism is
I
false.
don't disagree with that, but I'm saying you can make this claim because you already have experienced it.
Well, of course.
So that means, again...
How does that negate my argument?
That again means it's dependent. So, for example...
But again, there can be facts which are...
If there was 90% of people that was seeing green as blue, then they found out that there are 5% of the world that they actually...
What's the wavelength?
No, just the same wavelength, right? But what I'm saying then for them, you would be the case of very unusual. You know what I mean?
Right. But you think that when I'm talking about colour, I'm talking about moral facts. I'm not. The moral facts in this analogy are the wavelength. The colours are people's moral evaluations and disagreements. There can be the same wavelength
But
No,
you
no,
can't use that analogy.
Yes, I can. And
You can't.
But-
I'm very skeptical.
By the way, I think we're going to be agreeing on this example. By the way, so I would say in that case, the 5% who are seeing the wavelength as it's like meant to be, then I would say if they are able to provide proof, then they would be right.
Yeah, but then for them, you would be the one that is unusual.
Yeah, fine.
You know what I mean? That
Fine,
Exactly.
but I would be
Just
waiting
like-
for them to
exactly.
give me an argument
But
at a
doesn't
higher
it-
level.
But how
to
does
prove
that relate to moral realism?
Yeah,
People
I
could
know
all agree in Nazi Germany that killing Jews was right, and you rose up as an activist and said no, and everyone looked at you as a weirdo. But does that change the moral fact that killing these people was wrong? No. Just like with the colour, they see the same wavelength differently, but the wavelength is the same.
You cannot use to prove it because, as I said, I can claim that this is completely it's very depends on. It's dependent on our consciousness.
But the colour analogy perfectly accommodates that. There can be subjective evaluations of objective facts. That's what the point of that.
Yeah, but I'm saying that you can make that because you have experienced it.
Exactly.
So
I don't disagree with
it's
that.
not
And that doesn't negate realism.
Yeah,
People can apprehend.
it's not, but it's not absolute. That's what I'm saying. It's relative. It's not absolute.
People's perceptions of moral claims are relative, but there are some moral facts that are moral facts and objectively rather.
I still think that what
conclusion.
yeah.
We'll decide that we're going to close it.
So
Wait.
about that slide, Mary Ann's chili pepper thing. I didn't get what you were, this
No, I'm saying that Mary, before she ate the chili pepper, felt or had a certain mental state. Then after she ate the chili pepper, her evaluations changed. So I'm asking the question, why did her evaluations change? And I'm saying to explain that we need to posit facts about her to explain that. I'm saying if we extend the idea to idealized observers, then we arrive at the conclusion that there are moral facts.
but it's just, according to Mary, because Mary is subjective.
At first she thought chilies were great, but then she had chili, realised it actually tastes really hot or something.
According to her,
According to
her psychology.
No,
You're missing the point. No, you're missing the point of my analogy. I'm not saying because she feels chili peppers are bad, therefore there's badness. The whole point of that analogy was to show that facts can inform values, and that there's nothing wrong with saying that. And from that, I established the whole ethical naturalism which I was talking about. So
the chemical compound
it's not,
capsaicin that produces the chili heat.
and there's a fact of the matter about
He's
that.
saying that compound reacts badly with her makeup. And so there's a fact of the matter. Yeah, there's a fact of the matter because it's about the chemicals, the way the chemicals reacted.
So what's the conclusion now?
Alright, so, each person gives a conclusion. In conclusion, from basically from this perspective, and I didn't really get much to say since it was good that everyone got really engaged with it. And also I'm not really in the thinking zone right now as well. But in conclusion, from my end, what I can say is that the proposition that moral relativity holds, or cognitive relativism holds, is the idea that we don't want to discuss necessarily the invalidity of there being moral facts. What we do want to argue against is the fact that there are relativized facts. There are facts that human beings have, which we want to say are not absolute. Right? That's cognitive. That's what we want to argue here. And just because we assume that these facts exist and they're objective as far as we are concerned, it should not lead us to negate to the fact or induce the argument that there is an absolute good or there is an absolute value. If I were to sum it up, and that's why the second component of what I was speaking about, which I didn't get to go into further detail, was that morality. So that leads us to the question of where does morality come from? How do we describe it? What is the evolution of morality? Morality, as far as psychology is concerned, it comes back down to the Kohlberg moral theory. So that's the idea that it develops over time. It's something in which human beings, through the interactions with the world around them, develop. So if I were to, that's pretty much, I guess, the essence. While I really appreciated that Hasan had really made the effort to, he's a high school student and he's done really, really well.
Great job.
He's wonderful. And I didn't feel as if I was at a capacity to answer him. But I didn't feel as if the arguments were naturally affecting this idea. They weren't naturally going against this claim, which is why I didn't know what to say, because I didn't find it going against me. I can accept these ideas, but what I want to argue in essence is that these facts, they don't necessarily, our moral facts don't necessarily lead us to the conclusion that there are absolute facts. And I think that's perhaps where maybe Hasan might disagree with.
In conclusion, I'd like to say that obviously thanks to you for coming, really great meeting you all. I'll just say firstly that I think a lot of people have sort of approached this conversation with a preconceived idea of what moral realism is and what you can accept and cannot accept as a moral realist. And I try my best to try to dispel that. Secondly, I agree, yes, with the science and the points that you brought up, but I disagree that we're sort of complementing each other in that moral relativism is saying that there are no moral facts because there's cross-cultural differences, and these cross-cultural differences are irreconcilable. Whereas I'm saying, yes, there are cross-cultural differences, but independent of culture, from the point of view of an idealized version of ourselves as the access to all these relevant facts, we can categorically, objectively say that killing babies for fun is wrong, murdering people for fun is wrong, and of course we have to have conditions here. It makes no sense. The charge that moral realism is incoherent because we provide conditions I think is an empty argument, because of course we need to have conditions. Otherwise our whole discourse is meaningless. Can you speak of quantum physics without speaking first of classical physics? You need to speak about these other things. You can't have ideas don't exist in a vacuum. That's basically the idea I've been trying to put it. I think that I gave a strong argument in saying that we need to posit these facts to explain why we value certain things. I think there is objective morality, maybe not the Platonic, transcendent, absolute sort of morality everybody wants to think exists. I agree with you that probably doesn't exist. But I think as a naturalist, we can reduce moral statements to facts about the natural world, and the fact that we all observe the natural world means that we all have the same basic moral facts in a sense.
So those moral facts want to reduce or relativize.
That's what I'm saying, but I think
maybe should find a good Thanks a lot. Thank you, brother. Great. Thanks a lot.
Present for next